I never imagined my own daughter would push me so violently at the Christmas dinner table that I would collapse to the floor in front of the whole family, just so her mother-in-law could take my place. What she didn't know was that on that very night, I would change her life forever. She woke up the next morning to 50 missed calls, and by then, it would be too late for apologies. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because we share new stories every day. Leave a like and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 65 years old, and I spent my life building a small empire in Boston from scratch. I raised my family with love, dedication, and tireless effort, and I believed my sacrifices were recognized and appreciated. But that Christmas Eve, I realized I had been living in an illusion. I had arrived at Vanessa and Brandon's house just after 4 p.m., carrying gifts for my grandchildren, Emma and Lucas. Emma, at 12, still hugged me tightly as she had when she was little, and Lucas, at 15, barely had to stretch his arms to hug me, already taller than me by inches. I also brought a bottle of champagne I had been saving for a special occasion, one of those rare, expensive bottles that cost nearly $350. The house smelled of roast turkey and cinnamon. The lights twinkled in gold and red, and everything seemed perfect for a family evening. "Grandma Evelyn!" the children shouted as they ran toward me. Their genuine excitement warmed my heart. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, smiling, but it was a smile that never quite reached her eyes. There was always a calculation behind it, an assessment of every word I might say. "Evelyn," she said, her voice polite but clipped. "So glad you could make it early." Brandon came out behind her, holding a glass of wine. "Hi, Mom," he said, nodding slightly. His tone was cordial, yet distant. I noticed something immediately. The table was set for 8, but only 6 of us were there. Me, Vanessa, Brandon, and the children. "Is someone else coming?" I asked, casually. "Yes," Vanessa said, smirking faintly. "My mother will be here soon. She didn't want to miss Christmas dinner." I froze. Her mother, Margaret Hale, was 68, wealthy, polished, and a woman who had always been a subtle competitor of mine. In business and in social circles, she had a way of making every situation a game. I had tolerated her presence in the past, but now, something in my chest tightened. When Margaret arrived, she was cheerful, greeting everyone as if she were the queen of the house. And then I noticed the subtle change. Brandon immediately leaned in, attentive, polite, eager to please Margaret in a way he had never been toward me. "Mother, it's wonderful to see you," he said, almost bowing. I thought, perhaps, it's the holidays. I'll ignore it. We sat down at the table. I instinctively went for my usual spot, the head of the table, next to Brandon. It had always been mine, and for decades, I had presided over family gatherings here, sharing laughter, stories, and warmth. But as I lowered myself into the chair, Vanessa spoke. "Mom, I think you should move. This seat belongs to my mother-in-law." The words hit me like a punch. What? My voice faltered. Vanessa's expression was cold, calculating. I said, "This seat is for Margaret. Please, step aside." My heart raced. I had never been treated like this, not by friends, not by business rivals, certainly not by my own daughter. "This is my place in this family," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice calm. "I've always sat here." The children froze. Emma clutched her napkin tightly. Lucas's jaw tightened. Even Brandon seemed stunned, caught between his mother and me. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Mom, don't make this difficult. Move." I felt a surge of anger, hurt, disbelief, and betrayal. I looked around the table. Margaret smiled faintly, sipping her wine. Brandon avoided my gaze. The children stared, confused and anxious. I stood, attempting to assert some dignity, but before I could even react, Vanessa reached for my shoulders and shoved me with such force that I toppled forward. My head hit the edge of the chair first, then my knees buckled, and I fell onto the polished hardwood floor. The silence was deafening. Emma cried out, "Grandma!" Lucas scrambled to help me up. Margaret's smile remained, but now I noticed something cruel in her eyes. Satisfaction. I tried to get up, my hands trembling, my body aching, but the humiliation was complete. Vanessa and Brandon continued eating as if nothing had happened, their conversation now entirely devoted to Margaret. Teresa's forced smiles, the children's wide-eyed stares, the gleam of triumph in Margaret's eyes. It was unbearable. I stayed down for a moment, collecting myself. Not tears of anger, but a cold clarity began to form inside me. My daughter thought she had won. My family had humiliated me publicly. But she didn't know that Christmas Eve would be the night her life would change forever. When dinner continued, I sat quietly in the side chair, excluded from every conversation. Every laugh between Vanessa and Margaret felt like a dagger in my chest. Every polite word Brandon offered Margaret, words he had never spoken to me, stung deeper than any insult. I observed everything. The tiny nuances, the calculated gestures, the way Margaret subtly directed Brandon. My mind raced. For 40 years, I had built a life, raised my daughter with love, sacrificed for her happiness, and trusted her with everything I had. And now, in a single evening, she had thrown that trust and respect aside like it was nothing. After dinner, I excused myself. "I need a moment," I said softly, standing up and walking to the study in my car. I closed the door behind me and took a long, steadying breath. I unlocked my phone and began dialing numbers. The first call went to Claire Bennett, my lawyer of 20 years. "Evelyn, it's Christmas Eve," Claire answered groggily. "Yes, Claire. I need you to prepare documents first thing tomorrow morning. Vanessa's powers in the family business are to be revoked. Every single one." A long pause. "Are you sure, Evelyn?" "I've never been more sure of anything. She doesn't deserve the trust one gave her. The time for lessons is now." Next, I called Sophia Lee, my accountant and CFO. "Sophia, I need every joint account frozen, every financial guarantee cancelled, starting immediately. Vanessa's salary, benefits, and privileges are suspended as of tomorrow morning." "Is this legal, Evelyn?" Sophia asked. "Perfectly legal. Just necessary. She will learn consequences the hard way." Finally, I called Karen Mitchell, my right hand, the woman who had been with me since I started the family business. "Karen, go to the office at 7 a.m. Remove Vanessa's personal belongings. Place her access cards and notes on her desk. She will wake up to a world she didn't see coming." I hung up, my mind cold and precise, but my heart strangely calm. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. For decades, I had poured my life into this family and business. I had sacrificed nights, weekends, and holidays. I had believed my love and dedication were reciprocated. Vanessa had just shown me they were not. And now, I would ensure she understood that actions have consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes irreversible. I returned to the living room with a calm smile, as if nothing had happened. Vanessa and Margaret were laughing, Brandon attentive. The children were whispering. I nodded politely and excused myself, retreating to the sanctuary of my home where the real work would begin. That night, while the city slept, I spread out decades of financial documents, stock agreements, property deeds, and contracts across my oak desk. Every folder, every paper, every signed note, meticulously reviewed. I confirmed something I had suspected. Vanessa had never truly owned any part of the business. Every authority she had wielded was granted by my discretion, which could be revoked at a moment's notice. I set my plan into motion. By morning, Vanessa would wake up to a world she never imagined. 50 missed calls, financial chaos, and the realization that she had underestimated the woman who raised her. The storm had begun, and I held all the weapons. I slept poorly that night, not from guilt, but from anticipation. The house was quiet around me, except for the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of Boston traffic. I had never enjoyed cruelty. I'd never wanted to humiliate my child. What I wanted was simple and cold. Consequence. A lesson. A border. At 6:30 a.m. my phone woke me. The screen showed no missed calls yet, only an early message from Claire. Documents ready. Will file at 8 o'clock. Call me when you're ready. I dressed in calm clothes, a navy suit I'd worn to countless board meetings, and made myself black coffee. The routine steadied me. There is an odd serenity that comes with decisive action. A clarity that sits under the skin and steadies the hands. By 7 a.m., Karen was at my front door. She hugged me like she always did. A quick, professional squeeze that carried decades of loyalty. Everything's in the car, she said. I quarterbacked the IT request. The access revocations are queued. Linda already approved the freezes. The bank liaison is on standby. We moved fast. Karen drove us to the family business, Carter and Hale Design, a modest, efficient office in a converted brick building near the harbor. People had called us quaint, and I had preferred it that way. We'd built the company with sweat and intention. Karen met me at the glass doors, already into motion. They won't expect this, she said, pressing her lips together. But legally, we're airtight. At 8 a.m., Claire walked in, her suit immaculate, a folder in hand. She placed the file on my desk and looked at me with an expression I'd come to trust. You understand the civil and criminal options they might throw back? She asked. I do, I said. We're not here for drama. We're reasserting the truth of what was always mine to give. I slid my signature across a page with steady fingers. Power revocations. Termination for cause. Retrieval of company assets misused. A notice to the banks to rescind any guarantees. Every line had been carefully phrased, every action backed by documentation. I had not moved without proof. That was the part of the plan people always underestimated. Facts beat fury. By 9 a.m., IT had cut off Vanessa's administrative access. The receptionist politely informed her by email that her badge access had been temporarily suspended pending an administrative review. At 9:15, Karen opened Vanessa's office after escorting in a junior HR person. They packed a small cardboard box with personal items, a framed photo, a succulent, a notebook, and left a neatly folded note on the desk. This office is not for you. At 9:30 a.m., the banks began calling. The voice from the first bank was polite, then brisk. Ms. Carter, we've processed your cancellation of guarantees. The mortgage on the lakeside property is entering default status without the cosigner. We are initiating standard procedures. I listened, recorded the call, and replied, proceed as necessary. Notify Vanessa's counsel of the change. I hung up and sat back, watching the ripples spread outward like stones in a pond. By 10 a.m., the phones in the house were ringing in a frantic chorus. Vanessa's line lit up in my office as if fate itself had dialed. She tried to call Karen first. The call went to voicemail. She tried to call the bank. They'd already left a recorded notice. HR responded to her frantic emails with the same gentle, bureaucratic calm we had rehearsed. What she didn't know was how quickly momentum gathers when the law and evidence are aligned. At 10:22 a.m., a car pulled up in front of her condo. The repossession notice arrived in the mailbox at 10:27. By 11:12 a.m., an email from their mortgage servicer landed with the subject line, immediate action required, loan in default. The credit card companies that had previously accepted her corporate expense claims with a smile now flagged transactions for inquiry and termination. The payments she'd budgeted on the back of my name had been called in, one by one. At 11:39 a.m. I received the first of many messages, a terse text from Vanessa, words flying like birds. "Mom?" Claire called. "Why is my email down?" She called. I let it go to voicemail. I had taught my daughter how to read people. I had taught her how to count on promises. Today she would have to learn how to count everything else. The house, the one in my memory that once smelled of pies and school projects, was quiet for a while. When Vanessa finally came through my front door an hour later, she wore that expression people put on when they think endurance and volume can replace apology. Her hair was done, her bag slung over one arm like a shield. "Evelyn," she said, eyes flashing. She moved too fast for tenderness. "What have you done?" I had tea ready. I handed her a cup. She took it with the politeness of a person who expected condescension. "I revoked your privileges and placed the company under audit," I said. "I also instructed the banks to enforce the guarantees as written." Her face drained white. For several breathless seconds, I watched the slow unravel of swagger. Pride does not fall quickly. It comes down like a person unprepared for winter. "You can't do this," she snapped. "You can't just revoke everything. You're my mother." The words had the brittle edge of someone who had been cornered. "You're also an officer of this company," I said. "Which means you are bound by fiduciary duty. You abused it. You extracted company resources for personal gains. That's not a maternal crime, Vanessa. It's a corporate one." I did not relish the words, but they were true. The auditors would agree. She stumbled toward the table like a wounded animal. Her phone buzzed, and for the first time, the sound was not for approval. It was a digital clamor of demands. Lenders, credit agencies, co-workers, her mother, her husband. The 50 calls that would later be referenced in every dramatic retelling were already rolling in. Her hands shook as she scrolled. The banks, the lenders, the repossession agencies, the HR emails. She read through a notification and let out a sound that was not fully a whimper and not fully a sob. "It's temporary," she said, voice brittle. "We can fix this. We can appeal. You have to." "No," I said. "We cannot fix entitlement with excuses. We don't negotiate with habit." At that moment Brandon arrived from his construction site. He had called me twice during the morning. The second time his voice had been sharp, then pleading. When he walked into my living room and saw Vanessa, the box on the table, the voicemail list scrolling on her phone, something in his face collapsed. He sat without dignity and looked at her as if she had suddenly grown foreign features. "Brandon," I said gently, "you witnessed last night. You saw the way she shoved me to the floor." He swallowed. "Mom, his words trailed. He tried to intercede as he always had, with calming gestures, rationalizations, a man attempting to patch a frayed rope rather than understanding the cut. "Did you ever stop to ask why I always came? Why I paid the tuition, covered the mortgage when things got tight, why I covered repairs and medical bills?" I asked. He couldn't answer because he had been raised in the same quiet compromise. Give so often you stop counting. He looked at Vanessa and then at me. "They called," he said. "The bank called. They said the guarantees are gone. There's a letter from HR. Vanessa, your access is suspended." Vanessa's eyes glinted. "You did this for show. You want revenge." "No," I said. "I did this to make you accountable." I thought about Emma and Lucas, the ones who had started the morning with a hug and ended it with confusion. What would they learn if their home was built on an assumption of endless rescue? That lesson had to be salvaged. The children needed a mother and a role model. So did Vanessa. The afternoon blurred into details. Claire filed motions for recovery of misapplied funds. Linda and Karen handled bank liaisons and sent the proof of misuse packages. Within 48 hours the media, never invited but always hungry, sniffed at a story. Prominent family firm faces internal audit. CEO's daughter suspended. That headline graced the local sites, fueled by anonymous tips. The press, hungry for drama, painted caricatures. I did not stop them. Truth does not require my intervention. Vanessa lashed out in the open, first with accusations, then with lawsuits and lawyers and demands for emergency injunctions. She accused me of elder manipulation. She accused me of breaking the family. Those calls were theatrics. Lawyers are adept at rhetoric. But documents are more patient. My ledger was a quiet, patient witness. Each withdrawal, each transfer, each emptying of accounts was a breadcrumb back to the truth. In the first week she tried to embarrass me. Then she tried to intimidate me. She offered apologies with conditions. She tried bargaining, we'll return a portion, sign a non-disclosure, come to a private settlement. But there is a certain point at which a lesson loses its clarity if you allow it to be diluted. I had seen too many people soften at the edges of consequences and then watch the same mistakes bloom again. During the second week, slow and precise things happened. An audit report enumerated misappropriations. The board convened and, citing conflicts of interest and breaches in fiduciary duty, voted to remove Vanessa permanently. Suppliers who had once smiled at her name resumed silence. Her social circle, which had banked on some imagined family wealth and seamless continuity, cooled. There is a peculiar cruelty in the measurement of respect. It often follows the map of one's capacity to endure consequence and not the map of one's words. Brandon, who had once been a diffident presence at my side, had decisions to make. He could stand with his wife, or stand with the truth. He chose neither cleanly. He tried to mediate, to argue for a middle ground. But adults who are judged by their choices must live with those choices. For the children's sake he lodged moral ambiguity like a splinter he could not easily remove. As this quiet tumult unfolded, something else happened that surprised me more than any courtroom victory could. The children began to find their own voices. Emma wrote me a letter, folded and careful, which I found on my kitchen table the night the hard copies of the audit were delivered. She wrote about standing in the doorway, seeing the shove, feeling the shame, and then about how she had chosen to read the bank letters not as gossip but as truth. She told me she loved both her parents and that she wanted to see them learn. Her words were the cleanest of all victory. They were not a call for vengeance. They were a plea for education. Lucas, older in his softness, came to my office one morning with a bag of muffins, offering them like an olive branch. "Grandma," he said simply, "I don't like watching people I love hurt. But I think you did the brave thing." He was 13 and his moral clarity beat my own internal hesitations like a drum. Those small reconciliations were the ink that made the lesson legible. Weeks turned into months. Vanessa fought. She summoned lawyers and reputation managers. She wrote op-eds in which she framed herself as a victim of generational cruelty. The community split into camps, some decrying what they painted as an unforgiving matriarch, some nodding, whispering, finally. My inbox filled with messages. From old friends, distant cousins, even former employees. Some offered sympathy. Others offered favored analyses. I read them and treated them like small stones and kept moving forward. At night, when the house settled, I returned to my ledger and my old desk. I marveled, not at my own actions, but at an incontrovertible truth. You can be kind and still be firm. You can be a parent and still point out the harm your child causes. Consequences are not cruelty when they aim to end harm. And slowly, in a way that felt like regrowth after frost, parts of the family remade themselves. Brandon, humbled and exhausted, found work in a small design firm that respected craft over billing. He came to me one evening with a box of sketches and redrafted plans for small-town revitalization. He had discovered that making good things better for others required less pretense and more labor. Vanessa, through the slow burn of court procedures and the relentless transparency of audits, retreated, not into shame, but into the more difficult shadow of reflection. She would not be spared stern lessons. I do not wish ruin on my daughter. I wish her a more measured, self-aware life. And the children. Emma joined a youth civic group. She and Lucas both began to visit a counseling center where they could speak without the urgent need to protect one parent over another. They grew in ways that softened the edges of the family's fracture. Months later, I received a short note from Vanessa. It arrived on a gray day when the wind had stripped the trees bare. She did not ask for reconciliation. She did not demand apology. She wrote, "Evelyn, I am aware of the harm I caused. I am learning. This is not a petition. It is a promise. I will not expect you to make my life easy again without reason. V. It was as much as I wanted. Not because I relished the victory, but because the admission bore the same weight as any legal document. A measure of awareness, finally, taken in an honest hand. The lesson had worked. It was not loud. It was slow. It was inexorable. Karma, if you want to call it that, did not shout. It moved in the practical arithmetic of firms, loans, signatures, and conscience. There were nights when I felt guilty. There were times a part of me softened and wondered whether I'd been too severe. But then, Emma's letter, Lucas's easy laugh, Brandon's small drawings, they reminded me of the point. If one generation never learns to bear consequences, the next will inherit chaos. My choice had been not to punish, but to protect the future. By the next Christmas Eve, the family came together in a quieter house. There were no grand announcements and no flashbulb moments. Margaret had moved away. Vanessa had rebuilt in small ways that did not require my sponsorship. Brandon had a steady job that allowed him to return to carpentry at his own time. The children greeted me with warmth carved by distance and solidified by trials. We sat at a table that smelled of rosemary and roast chicken. There were apologies muttered like rounded stones, and silences that felt like usable spaces. I did not raise my fork to any theatrical moment. I listened to them. I watched them. The quiet revenge I had chosen, the one that taught accountability rather than inflicted spectacle, had altered lives. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? There is no single answer. There are only choices, each with a cost. Mine had been steep, but it returned something vital: ownership. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened not by money, but by truth. If this story moved you, if you've had to draw a line that hurt as much as it healed, tell me in the comments. Share where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories about people who choose to protect themselves and their futures, even when the cost feels ruinous. Because sometimes justice is quiet, meticulous, and inevitable. And sometimes the real mercy is giving someone the chance to learn before you help them again.